Hello, everyone. My name is Ellen Sassman, and this is my presentation for Social Work 501 on older adulthood. Today, we are going to go over Erikson's developmental stages and psychosocial crises, with our main focus being on the final stage of Erikson's model, older adulthood. Older adulthood is characterized by the psychosocial crisis of integrity versus despair. And this is the stage where people are most likely to reflect on their lives and reevaluate what they have done so far, either deeming their life a success or holding lots of regrets. For a little background on the client that I interviewed for this project, she's a white female. She was born in 1934 to a small farming family. She identified some important events in her life, especially that occurred during this stage of older adulthood, as becoming a great-grandparent, experiencing the death of her husband, who had Alzheimer's, selling the family farm they had shared together, and consequently downsizing her house, and also retiring from her positions in the various community organizations she belonged to. These events can really be broken down into challenges and accomplishments, with the challenges being the death of her husband and the downsizing of her house. Then the accomplishments being the years she has held positions in social organizations and watching her family grow up. The relocation of housing is a major challenge that naturally comes with old age unless a person doesn't see to make it that far in their life. Perry, Ruggiano, and Stompel created a study on how relocation affects older adults as well as why they choose to move. They found that people tend to draw from previous experiences when faced with adversity. So, in applying this to my client, in her younger years, her house had actually burnt down. So, she kind of took the resilience that it had from that challenge and applied it to this relocation of having to start over in kind of a new building and starting over in a new kind of situation as well. Erikson's method actually broke down development into 8 different psychosocial crises to correlate with different developmental stages. Like I said earlier, the crisis that correlates with older adulthood is the crisis of integrity versus despair. This is described as an internal crisis where if a person feels they regret too much in their life and that they wish they would have done more, they could feel despair of their impending death. If a person is accepting of the life they lived and have come to terms that they will die one day, it can lead to a sense of integrity. A few things my client reported as helping her get through the adversity that occurs with old age, which led her to a sense of integrity. The main point she really wanted to get across to me was about her faith and religion that keeps her having a positive attitude despite all the challenges she has been through. In the study done by Hayward and Krauss, they looked into how religion can lead to positive coping mechanisms in older adults. They found that religion creates a sense of meaning in a person's life, and that their level of religiousness can either decline or increase as a person ages. When we were looking over my client's history, she said that she had always went to church, but her parents never did. So she was pretty religious to start out with. And then she said that whenever she got married, whenever she was like thinking about getting married, she vowed to switch churches to her husband's church, her soon-to-be husband's church, and that she would go to church with him instead of continuing to go to her own, which she eventually carried out, and she continues to go to that church that they used to go to together to this day. So in my client's case, she always had a high sense of religion, so it continued that way into older adulthood, giving her a way to cope with the stress that she has encountered. Some other biopsychosocial factors that I determined helped her move towards integrity instead of despair. It includes the culture she was raised in, which is like the farming culture, which acknowledges hard work through the tasks that she had to do, and her perception of socio her socioeconomic status, where she was recognized as poor by society, but she didn't actually perceive this as being true, so she didn't feel like it held her back like other people would think it would. Some things that I think might have hindered her in the resolution of this current stage, considering she is still in the younger side of older adulthood, she is only now experiencing health decline. So with her age, she's slowing down. She's starting to, although she seems to be coping with this well, and she seems to know her limitations as to how far she can push her body. Also, her one regret in life was that she didn't become a nurse. So her education level wasn't as high as she wanted it to be. The client reported that she now finds it interesting when her friends tell her about their health problems or her own problems, and she wants to learn as much as possible about them. So this kind of fulfills that desire. So she also felt like it wasn't like that big of a regret, because she definitely said she wanted to get married a lot more. Some forms of oppression that she could have faced that would have hindered her resolution of the crisis stage is through classism and societal sexism. She was considered poor while growing up, but reported seeing as a non-issue, like I said before. She had all her essential needs met, like food, clothing, and shelter, which could have made this perception a little bit better about her wealth. She also reported not being made fun of for not having what she calls baker's bread for school lunches. She said that all of her other friends could go out to a bakery and buy their own bread, but her family had to make bread for their sandwiches. And when they made bread, it was like a huge deal. She also thought that she only had one option in life, which is attributed to societal sexism. So her only option in life, because she was a woman, was to become a mother and get married. She kind of had to sacrifice her dream of becoming a nurse in order to get married and start a family, which of course is no longer the case in today's society. So back then, in the 40s, the woman was just staying home and making babies. Using a multi-systems lens to look at what helped the client live a fulfilled life, she has had mostly positive interactions through social supports in her various organizations she belongs to, which the authors Damajinko and Pahor found to be one of the keys for older adults' perception of a successful life is if they continue to stay active and not socially isolate. This led to feeling of a better health as well, despite a diagnosis like arthritis or diabetes or anything like that. She also continues to meet with her sisters once a week for lunch after church, which they actually named Sisters. Hospice also seemed to help her while her husband was dying through palliative care, and even having a worker who was a close friend of hers come to her house on the night that he died to help her with the next stages of what she needed to do. She also reported accepting the death of her husband, and in the end, the passing was seen for the best. According to the study conducted by Chan and Chan, it is easier for people to accept death when the death's timing is perceived as natural and good. We also talked about how she had enough time to prepare herself for this death, since it was such a long process with his illness. Also, the care that she and her husband received from hospice made the death easier, which is another factor Chan and Chan found to be true for the majority of their study, was if the hospital care was deemed good enough, then people seemed to be accepting of the death. Having to sell the farm hindered her development, though, in this stage because she had to give it up to the bank and the state, which was one thing she really did not want to do, but ended up having no option. The bank made it hard for her to say no when she was really desperate for money. And this is now where she is getting most of the money she's living off of, since Social Security wasn't really enough for her. So then applying the ecological theory by Brofenbrenner. The ecological theory looks at the person as well as the environment and thinks that people are active in their development, not just in their environment. The ecological theory places a lot of importance of perception of events, which I talked a lot about in the beginning of my presentation. The theory is also organized into micro, meso, exo, and macro systems. Looking at the client's major struggle in this life stage, which is the loss of her husband, the client didn't perceive her husband's death as a necessarily bad thing due to all the support she had before and after the death, as well as the time she had to prepare herself. Looking at the microsystem, the neighbors, family, and friends that helped with respite care, as well as assistance and support after his death with relocation. The mesosystem consists of what happened in the home. Microsystem placed a stronger bond between the neighborhood and community around her as she looked for friends to fill her time after the passing of her husband. Then looking at the exosystem, which would be considered hospice's rules and regulations regarding end-of-life care with terminal illness and how they affected her in a positive way. But if they had decided to cut some funding from a program within their area, the client could have been affected negatively. Finally, looking at the macro system, the politics surrounding Social Security, which forced her to sell the farm due to not being able to live comfortably while keeping up with payments. Her faith allowed her to cope positively due to a belief in heaven. Also looking back on her childhood at the cultural values farming instilled about life and death of the animals that she took care of. Considering the limitations of Erikson's theory of psychosocial development in that the stages are out of date, especially for today's society, not everyone will fit perfectly in a stage, as some may be straddling two different stages. Also, they may not apply to people with mental illness and developmental delays, since the age range would be off from the developmental range. Also, my client seemed to have skipped and combined the intimacy versus isolation and the generativity versus stagnation stage, since she had her first child at 18 and her last child at 27. Then she became a grandmother at 40. She was really in the generativity versus stagnation stage during her intimacy and isolation stage. These stages are not very developed either, and more description needs to be done to eliminate the sliding scale as seen in generativity versus stagnation. Finally, can one person ever complete the integrity versus despair stage? Because if someone is in despair with their life, there may not be enough time to change that fact. So then what? They just die and that's the end? They can't live in despair in the afterlife, so there should be another stage added that provides resolution to one's life. Also, if you look at the study done by Van Heel, Marverdale, and DeFry, it pointed out like I said, the sliding scale of generativity versus stagnation. Since they aren't opposite poles of a spectrum, they also wanted a little bit more idea of what stagnation was, because they only found a description of generativity And there seemed to be a lot more study about generativity than stagnation. And that seemed to kind of be true about every stage except for the isolation